Welcome to Birthing at Home, a podcast. I'm Elsie, your host. I'm a home birth mum of 2 little boys, a doula in Melbourne supporting birth at home. I'm a mental health nurse and the co-creator of Home Birth Victoria. If you want to learn more about me, the podcast, or my work, check out www.birthingathome.apodcast. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional custodians of the land I'm recording on in Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. I would also like to acknowledge that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have been birthing at home on country for tens of thousands of years prior to the British invasion and acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. This episode is a part of the Home Birth Around the World series. In this episode, I chat with Renee, a community midwife or an LMC on the North Island of Aotearoa, New Zealand. I was really excited to chat with Renee as New Zealand is often looked up to in terms of its midwifery care and home birth access. Renee shares her journey to becoming a midwife and how the system works in Aotearoa. We cover home birth rates and access, the challenges, risks, and a bit about funding. If you know a home birth midwife in a country other than Australia who might be interested in sharing how home birth works in their country, please let me know on Instagram or send them my details. You can find those details in the episode description below. Enjoy! Welcome, Renee, to Birthing at Home, a podcast.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining me today on Sunday. It's always a bit tricky to line up podcast times when, I'm here in Australia and time differences and whatnot. So I really appreciate it.
Oh, cool. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So I guess you have agreed to come on and tell us a little bit about home birth, midwifery and home birth in New Zealand, which I'm very excited to hear about because, like we were just saying before we started recording, at least here in Australia, we look up to New Zealand and we kind of, aim to have what we think New Zealand has. So I'm keen to hear what New Zealand actually has.
Yeah. Cool. So I have been a midwife. This is my 7th year of midwifery. And I have been doing home birth since the beginning. So I came to midwifery after I had my kids. So I've had 4. And for me, it was more around that continuity relationship that we have here. So for those that aren't aware of how our maternity system is structured here in New Zealand, but in general, what happens is you have a government-funded maternity sector. All midwives are that practice this way are paid for by the government. There is no private midwifery in New Zealand. So you find out you're pregnant, you ring a midwife, and then we look after you right through your pregnancy, for your labour and birth, and then for 5 to 6 weeks postnatal.
Yeah.
So that's literally how all of us work. There are some private obstetricians, and there are some centres that would have community midwifery based from their hospitals, but they usually are for people who, because we do have a shortage of community midwives like us, which are called LMCs, which is lead maternity care.
Okay.
So the community teams that the hospital runs would look after women if they couldn't find their own LMC midwife. So
yeah,
that's pretty much how that continuity relationship, though, from finding out you're pregnant and registering with the midwife and then being with that same midwife throughout the whole pregnancy, labour and birth, and that postnatal period. It was that relationship that you build with the midwife in that time that struck me, and that's what pulled me into wanting to do midwifery. So I have never done, this is all I've done. I've only ever been the LMC community midwife. I've never worked in the hospital, except for the odd shift here or there if I've done a casual one to kind of help our local unit out.
Yeah.
Sometimes I've done that, but in general that I've not actually worked as a hospital midwife, just as a community one.
Yeah. And so does it differ, because we were just saying that you're based on the North Island, is it the same across New Zealand? Yeah,
so all New Zealand has the same rules.
Yeah.
So as a midwife, the only way we get paid is per module from the government. So every antenatal, birth, postnatal is known as a module, and we get paid from the government directly for those modules. So it's, in general, a pretty flat rate for us. But yeah, women, the biggest takeaway from that is that it was so that birthing people shouldn't have to pay anything for their maternity care. It should be equitable for everybody, regardless of your socioeconomic standing or what you can and can't afford. Then everyone should be entitled to the same care, right? That's the whole kind of purpose of it. Yeah.
And so do you find that most people, when they pee on that stick or whatever, does everybody approach like a midwife, or can you just opt out of that avenue altogether, or like?
So we would prefer if people read on that stick and rung us, because we book out so quickly, because there's quite a shortage. Of course, often when it's people's first babies and they're not, like, they haven't really been talking about it with people either, and they're not sure, they often just go to their doctor, like their GP. In which case they go to their GP, they might get some blood tests done and then get given a prescription for their folic acid and iodine or whatever supplements they're going to be given, and then they're told you need to go find a midwife.
Wow, so the GPs are like very on board with like we're utilising the midwives.
You have no other option, to be honest. Wow. So like you said, can you opt out of it? You can't. Opting out of it would mean having no maternity care, because that's how you would access it. Again, unless like I said, if people were trying to find a midwife and they couldn't, they were like, I've rung them all. In our town, we have about 12 of us who do the community midwifery. We're quite a small town. And if you can't book with one of us, then you have to go to the hospital team and use the hospital's service. Which essentially runs very similarly. You see there's one antenatal midwife and she does all the antenatal care, but then when you're in labour, you just have to go to the hospital when you're in labour and have whoever's on shift. And then they will try and find you a midwife for the postnatal portion. So, there's no... your option is to have a midwife, really, in this country. I guess in some cities they'll have private obstetric care, but that's not as popular and common as it used to be, and there's not really that many of them around so that kind of works slightly differently, but there's so few of them, and particularly in our region we don't have any privately practicing obstetricians anyway, so it still wouldn't be an option to anyone here.
And so as a what did you call yourself, a community midwife?
So we called LMCs.
LMC. So as an LMC, are there like exclusion criteria to your support? Like if somebody's having twins or breech, or they've had a C-section before? No, in short. Wow.
So we would then do what we'd call shared care in situations where it was high complex. So, for example, twins, theoretically, we have quite a robust referral guideline, which is when things come up and we would be expected to offer a referral to obstetrics. So twins, for example, would be considered a transfer of care. So we would have input from the obstetrics team, but we would still be the one that they'd still be coming to our clinic. We'd be the one sending them for scans and bloods and all that kind of stuff. And then as the pregnancy progressed, they would have clinics with the obstetricians as well, but there would be an expectation that we would be doing, the behind the scenes admin stuff for that woman. And then for her birth, the same thing, that they would, we would be the one that would go and attend the birth, but we would call obstetrics if we needed to.
So they could still birth at home?
Oh yeah, they could choose that. Yeah.
Whoa. Oh my gosh.
So there's no real, there's no law here, right? That tells people they can't do it. Yeah. Obviously there's strong recommendations. But we're very much autonomous practitioners here, and we don't have, particularly the way we work as well as LMCs, we are our own boss. We don't have, we have the Midwifery Council that is the overall governing body that protects the public from us. That's their job. And deals with complaints and people, we pay them for our practicing certificates every year and all that. But ultimately, no one can say to me, you can't support that woman in that home birth for that reason. Like that
if she's wanting and she is aware of like all of whatever, then you can support her on that journey.
In fact, I would argue that our duty of care is that if I have somebody who's at home who even I feel that maybe she shouldn't be birthing at home, but if she called me up and said, I'm in labour, this baby's coming, I refuse to go to the hospital, then my duty of care would be I have to go to her, even if I don't agree with it, because she's asked for my help, and if I don't give it, then potentially I'm going to get in more trouble for not attending her than if I attended.
Wow. See, I don't know if you know much about home birth midwifery in Australia, but women are getting dropped constantly, especially from publicly funded home birth programs, because they go over 42 weeks or they're risked out at like the 38-week appointment, and then they're left with no midwifery care. They say the midwives aren't allowed to come and support you. So
we couldn't do that.
Yeah.
We couldn't do it. We couldn't do it. And that just irks me so much, because in this day and age, I always think, who's truly low risk? Everyone tends to have something somewhere that would probably like raise a flag somewhere. It's so silly. Yeah. And of course, the different midwives will have different levels of comfortability.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of midwives that don't support home birth. It's not kind of like given here just because you're a LMC midwife here means that you'll support home birth, because there's plenty that aren't. And just like in every other country, I'm sure you have some midwives who practice quite on the medical side. And then those that swing completely the opposite direction.
Yeah.
But there's no like defining thing you have to do to be a home birth midwife here. So we have very similar to Australia. I think it's the 4-year midwifery degree. So it's got your bachelor's degree. It was always 4 years, but condensed into 3 years. But this is the first year that all our midwifery schools have had to make it a 4-year degree. Like there is no option for a 3-year anymore.
Yeah.
Which might help in keeping our students going through the program and becoming midwives at the end, because the problem is a 4-year degree in 3 years just means that you're doing longer, your semesters are longer, and you're doing all the same work but in a short time. So heaps of midwifery students were burning out, or they were finishing the degree and not working as midwives because they were already burnt out. But once you've done your degree and you've sat your registration exam, and if you've decided that you're going to be an LMC, then you get a contract with Tū Whatu Ora, which is our Ministry of Health, and then that's you. That's pretty much
as soon as you finish. As soon as you finish your Bachelor of Midwifery, you are eligible to become a LMC.
Yep. So we all register, and then once you've registered and get your practicing certificate, then you can decide, am I going to work at the hospital or am I going to be an LMC? Whether we have a midwifery first year practice program here. So in your first year, you have to enroll with it, and basically it just means you have a mentor and you get paid to do extra education just to kind of take you from the competent to the confident midwife in that first year with extra money, basically, so that you have the ability to have more people helping you if you need it. But essentially, once you have chosen your workforce and you've decided to be an LMC, you can be off and running. There's no requirement that you have to work in a hospital for so long before you can go out and be independent. You can just go straight into it, which is the road that I took. I just went straight into the LMC midwifery because that was what brought me to midwifery. So I didn't have any desire to be working in the hospital.
Yeah. And so, as a sort of backtracking a little bit, as a student midwife, in terms of placements and things, are you then like totally attending home births and stuff as a student along with the LMCs? Or?
Yeah, so that's always going to really depend on the placements you get and what midwives you get put with. So you do throughout each year, it looks a little bit different, but generally by the time you've come, I know from in my degree when I did it, by the time you get to your last year is 90% placement anyway, and you have a few different placements. So you've got a couple that are just within different hospitals, and they do like you to go to usually a hospital not in your area. So then you go to a different hospital for those placements, and then you'll have other placements that one of the longest ones they have is a 14-week placement, and that is with an LMC midwife. Wow. So you are just with her every day, basically following her around so that you can see her job in and out. So ideally you would want to be with an LMC then, particularly if home birth is where your heart lies. You would want to be with one that's going to have home birth so you can go. I didn't actually, in my studies, I really wanted to be able to go to home births, but I actually think I only went to 2 or 3 home births in my whole degree just because that's how my placements worked out. Yeah. And some of the midwives that I was placed with didn't offer home births. So it was a little bit of a baptism of fire when I came out, and that's what I wanted to do. But, you know, and then some students will luck out and be with a midwife who does heaps of home births. And so they see lots of it as a student. So you kind of can't, you can, to some degree, you can kind of pick your midwife that you get to go with. But because there will often be more students available than there are midwives that can take them, sometimes you just have to have the midwife that's got the space and kind of has the numbers. So you need to be with a midwife who's busy because, you know, you've got numbers that you're getting, which is, you know, it's terrible that it comes down to that at the end of it. But in the last year, that's what you're looking at. You're just trying to get yourself signed off. Yeah.
Do you remember so here in Australia, at least when I'm not a midwife, but I was a student midwife. We had to get like 100 postnatal visits, 100 antenatal visits, and then I think it was like 20 vaginal births and like 10 complex births.
So we definitely have similar. I can't even remember the numbers of antenatal postnatal because, to be honest, you absolutely will get them in your 4 years because it is something like 100, but you'll easily get that. It's here it's 40 facilitated births.
Yeah, okay.
And you can start getting them from year one. It doesn't have to all be in your last year, but the reality is that a lot of the time people aren't counting births until they get to the last year anyway. Also, the definition of facilitated is always a bit murky because, you know, if someone literally walked in the door and a baby dropped out of them, you can count that. Zero facilitation going on, but you can count it. But if you've been with a woman for 12, 14 hours and then she ends up with a ventouse or forceps or a cesarean, then you can't count that as facilitated, which always blew my mind. So I'm like, there's so much more decision making in those births. But so 40 is kind of the magic number, which can be quite hard actually to get. I mean, especially if you're looking at a roughly 38% cesarean rate, I think in the country, it's like a little bit difficult to be relying on that.
And still a 38%. Did you say 38%?
Yeah, I think it's about 38%. Yeah.
Wow, that's wild. Even though that you have like this amazing midwifery care, that's wild. Yeah, I'm just like blown away by that. I'm also just blown away by, you know, you finish uni and you can just start attending home births because here, at least at the moment, you have to do like 5,000 hours in basically a hospital.
Oh, wow.
And then you have to get endorsed, which is like a whole other thing. That's like a whole other post-grad. And then only then can you become a private midwife that attends home births.
Isn't that so crazy?
Yeah. So it's like so crazy because like here, at least at the moment, I think the majority, I would say all of the Bachelor of Midwifery programs are 3 years. But I think depending on where you are in Australia, it is a bit uncommon to only have Bachelor of Midwifery. Often it's alongside nursing as well. So then it does become 4 years, and that's what I did. So then you have your 4 years, but like obviously nursing, you're learning like highly medicalized
very different
skills. It's very different. But yeah, it would be so interesting to see what the syllabuses look like, because I just don't understand how. I mean, even when I was talking to Lucy, the independent midwife in England, like, yeah, when she finished her degree, she was allowed to just go out and, be a home birth midwife. But here in Australia, it's very difficult. And yeah, for me personally, I just saw that 5,000 hours and I was like, actually, I don't want to do that. And if that's the only way in, then I'm not even going to bother.
Yeah, that just blows my mind. Like, that's so long.
Yeah. And especially because when you think about the majority of, midwifery students are women. So you go in when you're like, I don't know, 18, 19, there's a lot of young women. I know I was. Or at the other end, mums with kids that are doing it.
Yeah.
And the amount of time it takes, like, you got like 7 years basically before you can actually be, and that's if you're doing it full time as well.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's halfway to being a doctor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. And so what I wanted to ask as well is about professional indemnity insurance.
Yes.
Like, who covers that?
So we also have the New Zealand College of Midwives.
Yeah.
So New Zealand College of Midwives is our professional body, and we all have membership, like we sign up to membership for that, and that gives us our indemnity insurance. So that covers us for all of that kind of stuff. And yeah, there wouldn't be any practicing LMCs that don't have that membership anyway with New Zealand College of Midwives. So they're there for us. They're our support. They also have legal support, so that if we did have like an unexpected outcome or anything, then the first thing we would do is contact the lawyers for them as well through them. So yeah, that kind of covers us, and it's really not that expensive at all. I mean, you can pay it off on a weekly basis, and it's maybe like $20 or something a week. But like that, that has you covered for all of that kind of thing as well, which is obviously super important.
Yeah.
And you do, and I will preface it by saying that even though we do come out and we can practice and do home births straight away, you have to have there are requirements around practice partners. So you have to be working with other midwives, because you do need 2 midwives at a home birth. Yeah. And you do, even if you're birthing women at the hospital, we don't in my area we don't have like primary units here.
Okay.
Other parts of our country do, but not in our little town. So we've got a secondary hospital, or we have home births. So even if we're birthing there, you still need to have practice partners, because you need to be able to offer your clients 24/7 midwifery care. And of course, it's completely unreasonable to think I'm going to be on call 24/7, 365.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think it's what they want, but so you do have to work in. You do have to have the partner, and obviously you have to the requirements, because we're self-employed. The requirements of all the equipment and medications and stuff that you need obviously is on us as well.
Yeah.
But we do get a little bit of extra funding for women who home birth to try and offset that cost of the stuff that we need.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's completely on us to have all that stuff, oxygen, all that kind of thing. We have to have arranged that and paid for that ourselves. So, there's quite a lot of setup with that as well. And some people aren't comfortable doing home births straight off the bat either. We've got a couple of new grads working in our practice this year, and they'll come and second us for our home births. But the clients that they're taking on for this year, they have kind of said we wouldn't be that comfortable offering home birth this year.
As the primary midwife.
As a primary midwife.
Yeah.
So it is a little bit, there's not really a definitive, you must tick all these boxes before you can do it. Almost like a lot of it comes down to your personal confidence in home births, I think, actually.
Yeah. And so because there's also, I guess you could call it like witch hunting of home birth midwives in Australia. when something, you know, when you need to transfer to hospital or something that was unexpected happens, what is your experience, I guess, like with the culture around, you know, that transfer and how you're received in the hospital and what they think of home birth midwives?
So we, all home birth midwives who have to have an access agreement to the local hospital as well. So there's no like you have to transfer, so you're at the door, see you later, handing them over. You can work in the hospital as well.
Wow. Yeah.
So I haven't, and again, this is probably could be quite regional, and I'm sure there are absolutely midwives in different regions of our country who may have different experiences, but particularly in our area, we have actually quite a good culture amongst the other midwives around home birthing. Yeah. I'm sure some of our obstetric doctors are quite supportive, even though I'm sure that we've given them grey hair when they've found out in which situations we've home birth. But I've never had anybody basically give me grief over a reason to home birth. I think a lot of that too is because I am just very, very big on informed consent and information sharing. So at the end of the day, I personally will support women to birth at home in almost any situation.
Yeah.
I have done home births in situations where I was like, this is probably not a good idea. But the woman was just, she had all the information and she was like, well, this is what I'm going to do and I'll sign something if I have to, but this is a choice I'm making and I either do it with you here or I do it by myself.
Yeah.
So for me, as long as I've had all the information and they know essentially what they're kind of getting themselves in for and they're willing to take their share of the responsibility, then I'm happy to support them.
Yeah.
I also like to think that, particularly in the way we work here, is that because you are their midwife from the time they found out that they're pregnant all the way to them giving birth, in that time frame, you've been able to grow that relationship with them and you have a lot of mutual trust. And so I always like to think that because I'm very confident at home and I'm confident to manage quite a lot of emergencies at home, that if we're at home and I say to them, this is really not good and we need to go, then they trust that that's coming from a place of all seriousness and not that I have to go because because I'm overreacting or because I think, oh, this isn't good and someone's going to tell me off because we've stayed home. Like that's not that for me at all. It's if I genuinely think this is not okay and we really need to go. So because of that as well, I feel that if I did say that, then they would go if they knew I was doing it from a place of a true emergency. But I haven't really, I've only really had one birth that would be probably go into that box.
Yeah.
Most transfers haven't been really that. It's usually for pain relief or, a placenta that doesn't want to come out, and then comes out as soon as we walk in the door. Like
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And would you say that even amongst like ambulance or paramedics, it's the same kind of reception that they're like kind of on board with being a part of that support?
Yeah. So I've never had any. I've never had any issues with any of our AMBO staff to me anyway, or in that situation. Whether they say stuff to other people outside of that, I have no idea. But definitely the reception to us isn't negative. In general, if we're ringing ambulances anyway, we just are really using them as transfer service because in that role, when they turn up at one of our emergencies and we're there with them, they very much are expecting us to still remain clinically in charge because we know more than them in that regard, and they do expect us to go on the bus with them. So, so that's kind of what we do. We really are just using them for transfer from at that point.
Yeah. Wow. That's just like, so incredible. It'd be great to speak to even more New Zealand midwives to really like a set like a that it's not just you because like that's so different to here in Australia. It's like paramedics at least that some of the mums that I've had on the podcast sharing their birth stories have actually had partners that have been paramedics or are paramedics, and like hearing about how fearful they are of like going to births, if even if it's not meant to, if it's a precipitous labor or something, it wasn't actually meant to be a home birth, how fearful paramedics often are. But even like some of the reporting to like the regulation, I can't say the word today, body, like that comes from, ED staff and paramedics, and it's very, it's quite toxic, really. And I think that pushes midwives then as well, because I imagine if you're fearful that you're going to get reported, which is definitely on the minds of private midwives here, then you probably are either, more likely to swing one way, like to both ends of the spectrum, either be too safe or actually push it too far, because you're like, well, and I also know that, I don't know how, because even here in Australia, like state to state, it varies, which is very annoying. But at least here in Melbourne, in Victoria, I know most private midwives do not, if they have to transfer, they do not follow the woman in. So they do say, goodbye at whatever point, because I mean, I don't fully understand that in a lot of detail, but to do with it, they don't have that relationship with the hospital, which means that they might be able to go in as like a support person, and depending on like how much of a relationship they might have with the hospital, they might, sort of be able to take that primary midwife role without officially it being the case. But otherwise, it's expected that, no, you've come to hospital and now we're going to take over, which just must be horrible for somebody that's, had to transfer in, like that whole thing.
Absolutely. And now you're in an unfamiliar environment, completely detached from your plan, and now you don't even have the midwife that you've had this whole entire time. And admittedly, in the case of Australia, they've paid for. I mean, they haven't paid for us, but no, we don't. We don't. We just go in and just keep doing our job, but in the hospital.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense. That's the continuity, right? Like that makes sense. Wow. And like, I don't even know what else to ask. I just am so impressed, I guess. So what is the rate of home birth in New Zealand?
Well, you'd think it would be more than what it is, wouldn't you? It's about 4. It's about 4.
Yeah, it's so fascinating.
It's about 4%, and that's quite low. I feel
even the C-section rate is so high. Given, so from your perspective, what are the challenges that New Zealand faces with home birth then?
So for a start, I think the caesarean rate's really indicative of higher rates of induction as well. Different policies come out and research comes out all over the world, right? And then it changes things. I think COVID really had an impact on how much medical intervention people were having. So there's a bit of an off-run from that. But I don't know. I just feel like over the years, that caesarean rate hasn't really changed that much. It's still sat there. There was, I know in our region, there was for a time there a pulling away from using having assisted births, and so there was more caesareans because the doctors were doing less assisted births, which is another thing. I actually don't know what people's problem is with home birth, and I don't know whether it's just a society expectation or not. So while the country's home birth rate's 4%, our region is around 7%, so still higher than the country, but still quite low. My practice home birth rates vary year to year, depending on obviously how many people want home birth. But it's probably the last couple of years it sits around 35%, maybe. And then you'll get some midwives, and I mean very few, but some midwives that really just offer home births. That's all they do. I don't, because of where I live, you wouldn't have enough clients that would just home birth to actually be able to make pay your bills, because at the end of the day, that is what you have to think of. Also, I don't mind. I like the mix of it, because there's also a lot more, obviously, responsibility on you when you're home birthing versus when you're going into the hospital. So sometimes that pressure gets quite heavy when you've got quite a lot of home births, or if you've got someone who wants to home birth their breech baby, for example, that kind of thing. Obviously, that puts a bit more pressure on you. So then, you know, mentally, you can be quite thankful that's the only one you've got this month. So I think that's also some of the challenges with offering home births, is that you need to have all the equipment for it, which is a cost outlay. But you also have to have practice partners who will either be available to you to second, or be able to do it for you if you're not on. Because that's the other thing, is that for a time I'd be able to find midwives in my area that would back me up if I had a home birth, and they'd come. But then I'd find it hard to find someone who'd be happy to do my home births for me if I was going to be off, in which case then you don't go off, because just in case they birth. So of course that can get quite hard. But for the most part, potentially we as midwives, and I'll say we as in all of us, probably don't like advertise it or encourage it as much as we could. Because even though I love home births and I do a lot of them, I have to say I probably don't, you know, oh, hey, have you thought about birthing at home? Conversation as much as what I have because most of the time women come to me from the word go saying, oh, I'm interested in home birth, or I haven't made my mind up yet, but I'm thinking about that, or come straight, I want a home birth. If I've got a client that's like, oh, from the word go, I just want to birth in the hospital, I do find it a little bit trickier to say, oh, have you thought about home? Or, you know, just we always have a conversation about home birth just in case you don't make it, because you always have those ones. But yeah, in general, too, where I live, so our secondary care hospital, while we have 24/7 access to it, we don't have obstetricians and theatre there 24/7. They're only there Monday to Friday 9 till 5. So outside of those hours, they're all at home in bed. So I always talk to clients, particularly here in our region, is that there's not much difference between you birthing in the hospital then and birthing at home, because if you actually had an emergency where we needed obstetrics or we needed theatre, it's going to take them we can get an obstetrician to the hospital within 20 or 30 minutes, but theatre takes an hour for them to all come in and get ready to go. So we would be picking up that there was something going on well before that hour. So we would always have time to transfer. Anything that we as midwives, because I think people freak out, oh, what if I bleed after the birth? What if the baby needs resuscitation? But those are very fast emergencies. They happen super fast. They're also dealt with very fast. And all the equipment and medications that we as midwives are allowed to use, we bring with us to a home birth. If you needed something that I couldn't bring to the home birth, then I couldn't use it even if I was at the hospital. I would need the doctor to do it. So when people understand that, then they're like, oh, okay, I never really thought about it. I didn't realize you brought oxygen and that, you know, you can resuscitate babies, or you bring suturing stuff, so you can stitch me up if I need it. You know, like I think that there is a bit of this belief that home birthing means you're hippies and you're going to do nothing. We're just all going to sit there and sing songs and, you know, smudge our sage everywhere while the baby's born, you know, like, oh, you're bleeding and we'll sing it away. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't think they appreciate that we are medically trained and that we have all the drugs with us. So in general, in times where we've had to transfer, if someone was bleeding afterwards, I mean, they're stable by the time you've got them there. You know what I mean? So it's kind like that kind of thing does change a lot. And I think if more people understood that, then maybe more people would be inclined with home birth. The other thing is that, you know, they're like, oh, I don't want the mess. Like, you know, it's just so messy. And I honestly, I have to sit there, I'm like, I'm telling you right now that hospital birth is so much more messy than home birth. We are lucky here because our management wants us to have more home births. They let us borrow linen.
Oh, cool.
So
yeah.
we're allowed to go get a linen bag, and we just fill it up with towels and stuff from the unit, and then I just drop that with them, and then when we're done with it, I just take it back and drop it back off at maternity, and it gets taken away. Same with all the rubbish and stuff, we just drop it back up there, and it gets disposed of through the hospital.
Wow.
So I'm always like to people, like, when we leave 2 or 3 hours after you've birthed, there's like the only evidence that there's been a birth there is the baby in your arms. Like we take the mess with us. It's not really your problem. Our practice, and this is not New Zealand wide, but just our practice in general, we have our own birth pools. So we give those to women because we just think the hireage fees of birth pools can be quite steep and not everyone can afford that. So like we drain the pool, pack it down, take it with us too when we go. So like there's really nothing that they have to do except for the setup part of it. And again, I don't think they appreciate that. I just think they have that in this idea in their head, like, oh no, I don't want to do it. Yeah. So a lot of the time I don't really think there's, a really good reason that people aren't thinking about home birth. It's just almost a socially accepted, like, oh no thanks, I don't want a home birth, I'll just go to the hospital.
Yeah. Do you find that you have like a particular, I don't know, like demographic that seeks out home birth, or like do you find that you have more second-time mums after home birth, or more first-time mums?
So I think in general it would be people that have birthed before, because I think sometimes you do have those first time, I just want to see how it goes first, and then if I birth well the first time, then I'll probably feel more comfortable home birthing. I have to say probably this last year and this year we've had more first time mums, which has been quite cool. There's nothing quite like having that first time mum birth at home and then all her babies are born at home after that, and that's all they know is to birth at home. Which is such a different vibe, and I don't think that's what people don't appreciate. Like the whole vibe of home birth is just so different to hospital birth. I would say that most of my clientele too tends to be decliners. So if people are going to decline certain screenings or whatnot, then they are more likely to reach out to me.
I was actually going to ask that because even in the publicly funded, which is the the free programs here, you are not allowed to decline anything. If you decline like I actually don't know about GBS, but the glucose tolerance.
I knew you were going to say that.
Then you're just gone skis. Like you're out. You can be as informed as you want to be, but if you disagree with what the hospital says, you're out. With a private midwife, it is often quite different. And but again, back what you said before, it kind of depends on each midwife and their comfortableness. Like some midwives like you to have X amount of scans, some midwives like you to do this and do that, but some don't really.
I obviously don't have that. I was going to say, and I'd say about 80% of my clientele would decline gestational diabetes screening. And obviously like things like GBS GBS screening isn't actually recommended routinely in New Zealand anyway. So, but that doesn't mean that there's not heaps of midwives still unnecessarily doing it. But anyway, that's a whole other podcast on its own. So I have. I've had 2 planned breech vaginal births at home.
Wow.
And one was 3 years ago, and that was her second baby, and she'd had her first baby at home with us as well. And she was one that basically was just like, I will lock myself in the room by myself if I have to. I am not going to the hospital. So of course, but I feel like you shouldn't even have to do that. Like you shouldn't have to say that, because for us, particularly to here, breech is very much in our scope of practice. So I'm just like, why are we all arguing about this? It's literally in a midwife scope of practice, guys. It's not like it's something that we have to refer for. And then I just had another one, was about 5 weeks ago, and it was her first baby.
Wow.
Yeah. And I tell you what, so she was the first time mum I've seen deliver her baby breech, and I was just like, that's so much easier than a head down baby. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Like, it was so good. But again, it was kind of like they had in a situation like that where obviously the baby is malpositioned, so we do offer them a referral to obstetrics, which they did agree. So they did speak to obstetrics about it, and both of them did opt to try and have an ECV to get the baby turned, but it didn't work.
Yeah.
And then at that point they were like, the doctors discussed with them their options about cesarean birth, and they were like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to have vaginal birth. And they were both, neither of them actually said in the hospital, I'm home birthing this baby, but they did say, I'm going to vaginally breech birth. And to be honest, I've not actually had too much run-ins with doctors about that. They were just like, okay, well, if you've had all the information, that's what you're happy with, and your midwife's happy, then cool. We wouldn't recommend it, but that's on you to make that choice.
Yeah.
And then they were like, oh, well, this one I just had last month was like, oh, can I still home birth though? And I was just like, I mean, you can just, you can't ask for permission in these situations. You have to just tell me what you're doing. Yeah. And then that's what you're doing. Like that, you have to be confident in it, and just tell me what you are doing and what you expect from me, and then we'll go from there. So, and in those situations, I always will make sure that I have another midwife with me. I actually had 2 midwives. Both times I had 2 extra midwives come, and I've always seek out midwives who I know are comfortable in that. So I did in those occasions. I did get a midwife friend of mine to come, who I don't normally work with, who's done quite a lot of breech vaginal births. Just so that you've got that backup. I've done home births for VBACs. Again, you're always going to say, for low risk women, it's always safest to birth at home is kind of the national information that's given out. And of course, most people wouldn't see VBAC as the low risk option, but given that the actual risk rate of rupture is less than 1% still, how risky are they?
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Yeah. Like that. I'm just like, are we really going to take this drastic action when you have a 99% chance that you won't rupture?
Yeah,
that just blows my mind, because I just like, well, either you'll have a baby or you don't. And if you don't have a baby, then we transfer in. You know what I mean? Like that's that's kind of my viewpoint on it, and it's kind of really hard too. But the reality is that people are more likely to have successful VBACs and successful vaginal births if they are at home.
Yeah.
And so that is all the information that that you share too, and hope that they don't get too scared about it. But generally, I find if people have changed their mind because they've got scared, it's usually family. So I think often when women quite want to home birth and that's kind of become their plan, if that plan changes, it's often because either their partner or someone in their family and it has not been comfortable with it. That's generally where people would change their mind.
Yeah, it's just so fascinating because, it's so much more accessible to have a home birth. But, I mean, you're saying kind of like the same, society, perspectives, like that, the same problems, which is just, so wild, because realistically in the history of time, we only started birthing in hospitals not that long ago.
I know. Probably, I mean, even if you think 100 years ago, birthing at home was still more normal than birthing in hospital.
Yeah, and now we've completely swung to the very other end of the spectrum, if you could call it that. And like you say, it's still only, I mean, here it's less than 1%, but it's still in New Zealand only 4%. That's just, I mean, women here dream of just, being able to access a home birth and it not costing, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, $10,000, and then you've got to hire the birth pool, and then I don't even know how that works if the midwife feels that they need a second, third midwife. I don't really know how that works with payment. I presume you're paying extra then, because obviously you're paying for 3 midwives times. Like, and who's going to do, doesn't that make it more risky? If you can't access that extra backup support.
So I would, because I assume then if they're privately paying for a midwife in Australia and having a home birth, then the woman is also paying the second midwife.
Yeah,
is that part of the fee?
Everybody works, there's a couple of different ways that they do it. The ways that I know, like my 2 home births, I went with midwives that were a part of like you wouldn't really call it like a midwifery group practice, but like a midwife business. So you pay like an amount and then your second midwife is like included in that amount.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But there are also more independent-ish. Yeah. I mean, everybody still has to have 2 midwives, but they're more independent, and then they might have, a couple of midwives that they usually work with, and then they say, okay, well, these are your possible seconds, and they're available at the time of your birth. Yep. Who do you want as your second? Or this is the second that I work with and their cost is this. And sometimes, you might pay the bulk to the primary and then they split it up to whoever, or you might have to pay 2 different amounts. It's like quite inconsistent, really. At the end of the day, it's just so expensive.
But in this country, I would hazard to guess the 1% if it came down to paying too. So a couple of years ago, they put in what we call the second midwife fee in our fee schedule, because before what would happen is the main midwife would be claiming for the birth from the Ministry of Health, but then out of that money that she's claimed, which really isn't that much money, and for a whole entire pregnancy, birth, postnatal care, you're probably looking at around $3,500 is what we would get paid. So then you would have to pay the second midwife out of your own money, which of course made it really difficult for midwives to, 1, offer a home birth, or 2, ring a second, because it's it would be half their fee. Yeah. So they brought in the second midwife fee. So now when you do a home birth, the second midwife can claim to the Ministry of Health herself and get her second midwife fee, and it's about $600 or something. So, it's better than not getting paid anything. In my example, when I had got the thirds on, I paid them. So they can't do a second midwife fee, but I just paid out of my money for that, because just for it wasn't required, but that was just for me a backstop for making sure that we were just covering bases. Yeah. Especially in situations like with the breech, where obviously you do have a potential that the baby may be the one that actually needs more help than mum might. And so having 2 pairs of hands for the baby and then the other one can be with mum, was kind of my reasoning on that. At any rate, it was never needed, but, that's just the safety stop that I kind of had put in place that made me feel comfortable about being there in that position.
Yeah.
So it's quite, not everybody would probably do that. I'd be interested to know, because I don't even know if there'd be any kind of stats here to know even how many of our LMC midwives in New Zealand even like routinely offer home birth either. That would be quite interesting to see, because there's quite a large scope of that.
Are you paid differently, like if you are an LMC offering home birth versus working in a hospital?
Yeah, so if you work in the hospital, then you are just paid your salary by the hospital. Yeah. So the Ministry of Health obviously gives all their money to the hospitals, and each hospital will, it's unionised, I think, so they do have like like all midwives that work in hospitals in New Zealand will be paid on the same scale as each other. Okay. Yeah. And then it goes, every year they can get paid more money until I think the 7th year it kind of tops out. Whereas here for us as LMCs, the rates are really assigned to the woman you're looking after. Okay. So you're paid essentially everyone's paid the same base rate for all of the care given to women, and there are just kind of extra little bits of money that you might get if the woman is, for example, if she's Māori descent, Indian, like Samoan, like ethnicities that typically come with it a little bit of extra risk sometimes with their birthing experiences. So you might get, an extra $90 for that woman if she ticks those boxes, or if you've had to do a lot of acute call outs, then you can record your acutes and you might get paid a little bit of extra money per acute. So you'll get extra money for that. Home births, you'll get paid, I think it's an extra $580 on top of the birth fee to cover the cost of your equipment. And then you get paid a little bit extra for the postnatal period because obviously they've never been an inpatient. So when they're an inpatient, they're obviously cared for by the hospital until they go back home, and then they're basically discharged back to our care again. But obviously when they're home, that's not the case. So you have to visit more often when they're at home because you're going to go back the next day or that same afternoon if they've birthed in the morning. So there is a little bit of extra money in there to make up for that part. But in general, there's no difference in pay between, for example, a new graduate midwife offering home birth and me 7 years down the track offering home birth, and the midwife that's been doing it for 30 years. They're going to get paid the same amount of money. There's no way to earn more money. Except to take on more women. That's your...
So how many women roughly do you support per month?
So my group, we stick to around 3 to 4 per month. So we have that would be considered a small caseload. But that's mostly because it's really hard to have that really good, solid continuity relationship when you have heaps of women, because then you have short appointments and you're trying to see them all. So having the 3 to 4 means you can have longer appointments, and it means you can, you're more available when you're to offer home births and stuff. Typically our busier midwives here don't offer home birth. And generally that's what you see. Actually, the midwives that have the caseloads of 8 to 10 a month often aren't doing that many home births, to be fair. And so, that kind of, there's no actual legislation or regulation on how many women we can take either. The recommendation is that you have 40 a year. But plenty of midwives don't have 40 a year, especially if they're the breadwinner for their family. That's probably not going to be enough for them. But, definitely care starts becoming an issue when you're looking at, double figures a month. It's just, I don't even know how people do it. Like, do not know how they could mentally have the space for hold that much. And
many. And so with the modules that you get paid for, do you only get paid for all of that, like at the end of your care of the woman, like after that 6 months postnatal? So you get paid as you go along?
Now they pay it as we go along. It used to be that you'd get paid after first trimester and then you'd get paid at birth, like that. But now they pay us after. So you get paid when you register them. You get paid when they at first trimester, second trimester, and then you get third trimester and birth when they birth, and then you get postnatal when you've discharged them. But that's small amounts. I mean, you're talking like $110 when you register them, $110 at the end of the first trimester. It's small amounts. Most of the money in our job is really weighted in the birth fee.
Same.
Which is always hard too, because you're kind of a little bit like, you understand it, but sometimes where it's hard is that you're going to get paid the same amount whether you walked in the door and the baby was already out. So you haven't really had to do anything. To if you were with that woman for 24 hours, you know what I mean? You're going to get paid the same amount of money.
And if you transfer and end up being, the primary midwife in the room, even though you're in a hospital setting, are you still getting paid the same amount?
So our birth fee, we call it the birth fee, but it's labour fee, to be quite honest. So as long as somebody's gone into labour and you've done a labour assessment, whatever happens to her from there, you'll still get paid. So if they have an assisted birth or if you have a cesarean, it doesn't matter. She laboured, you did an assessment, you're going to get paid for the labour. It would only be, we just get paid differently if someone has an elective. So if they don't, or if they have an emergency without labour, then you won't get paid the birth fee part. And there's certainly no punishment and stuff to transferring either. I think often it's just probably how people are made to feel, but and I think you're always going to get some doctors here and there that have got something to say for it. I know one of my colleagues did have a doctor who was, as they were being wheeled to theatre, was listing off all these things that this woman had, that why on earth would anyone be agreeing to home birth for someone with all these things? And she hadn't been practicing for quite as long, and it really kind of like was a hard pill for her to swallow. And I was like, you have to remember though that they don't get to make the choice for the woman, and we don't get to make the choice for the woman. We just present her with her options, and they then can choose what they like with it. Like if someone never has an option and all they say is, you don't have an option, your option's the hospital, then there was no informed consent.
Right.
There's no informed consent if you aren't being given options. So if someone's like, all my midwife's got is the hospital, I can't home birth, I'm like, well, then you don't have informed consent, because she doesn't offer it, that's fine. But without the offer, you can't make an informed choice because you have no choice. So you're essentially, you're being coerced into birthing at the hospital. Yeah. Even if you're happy with that, it's still coercion because you weren't, and there was no other option available to you.
Yeah. I was recently at a like they're looking into the maternity workforce here in Australia, and it was like a forum thing, and so I went on behalf of Home Birth Victoria, and I ended up speaking to some doctors, and we were trying to ask them, why, like, just, in a friendly way, why did GPs not present home birth or even private midwives as an option? And they were like, oh, well, it's just extra time, like we don't have time, it's a 15-minute consult. And I was like, yeah, but you're giving private and public hospitals their time. Can't you just slot in there like one sentence about home birth or one sentence about private midwifery? Because quite like 1000%, if you're not actually giving somebody all of their options, that is not informed consent, because they don't know, like, they're not being given their options, they're just being told whatever the doctor in this particular case thinks they would like to do, really, is what it usually
100%. And my argument with that is the same though for midwives here, because at the end of the day, if someone's like, well, even if I wanted to home birth, my midwife doesn't do home birth, so it wasn't going to be presented to me. Well, the thing is, even if you don't offer home birth, you still have to tell them that that's an option for them. You still have, like, part of your obligation to give someone the options is to say, hey, you also have the option to home birth. Now, I don't offer home birth, but I could probably, if that's what you wanted to do, then you're more than welcome to find a midwife who could support you in that, you know? Because it's the same with, it's the same with anything. Same with breech births. Someone comes to you and says, I don't think I want a cesarean. And you're going to be like, well, I'm not going to support a breech birth.
Yeah.
So then you've coerced her too, because you don't want to do it. But that's not appropriate either. Even if the doctors don't want to support the breech birth, you can't just say to her only option is a cesarean. You have to present the option that she can choose to vaginally breech birth. Even if you don't recommend it, you still have to offer it as an option, because it is an option. Same if someone's, you could be in the life and death emergency and present surgery as a life-saving option, but you can't, like, that's your only option, because you can choose to still say no.
Yeah.
Even if that option means that you potentially are putting yourself at harm, that's your legal right to make that choice. And that's the argument that I have with just about anything that women choose to do. I was like, you guys, the medical profession likes to make out that women are willfully choosing to put their children in harm's way because of some selfish desire to want to birth however she wants to birth. And I'm always like, number one, you do not love that baby more than she does. No matter what you say, you do not love that baby more than she does. So even implying that you do is utterly offensive. But two, it actually wouldn't even matter if the decision she was making was going to harm her. She still has the legal right to make that choice.
Yeah.
Even if it was going to kill her, even if nobody agrees with it, she still has the legal right to do it. And to force it upon her if she's saying no would be assault.
Yeah.
So then why are we getting so worked up when women are choosing options for them that aren't even as bad as the risks are being made out to be? Sure, they might be more risky than somebody who doesn't have those things going on, but ultimately, when it comes to childbearing, the risks are so ridiculous. Like I remember going to the surgeon once about something completely random, and they were like, oh, look, there's a 75% chance it will work, 25% chance it won't work, probably worth doing in that case. And I remember laughing at him, and I said, you know what, if there was a 25% chance in my job, like that is absurd. We do not work with those numbers. We do not work with those numbers. We're thinking a 10% chance of a baby being at risk is like absolutely not. You must have a cesarean.
Yeah.
Because if you're thinking about
less than 1%, if there's a 1% chance of it happening, then nah.
That's it. I mean, you have someone with a classical cesarean and their risk of rupture is about 10%.
Yeah.
You would not find a doctor on this planet that would be willing to support a VBAC with someone with that. When you're talking like a 1%, it's even more ridiculous. So I was just like, this is the thing in our job, is that we become so baby-centric that we lose the woman in there altogether, and we essentially are just viewed as incubators. And that's the one part that I find it really hard, particularly too, like when legislations will change about, late-term terminations and stuff like that. For example, like a woman can have a late-term termination. So I'm like, so how come we are allowed to do that? But if a woman wants to choose an option that you, as a medical professional, are deeming too risky for that baby, she's not allowed to make that choice. Like, it just, make this make sense. Like, none of it makes sense. And nobody's out there willfully making a decision to put their baby in harm's way. Nobody.
No.
And while I think that there are the witch hunts and social medias can be quite unhelpful in these regards as well, because, of course, then free birth becomes a thing. I don't think free birth happens that much in this country, but probably because there is a little bit more accessibility of midwives and being able to home birth and stuff. And you'll always have the group of free birthers, right, that just will do it regardless, right, because that's their whole philosophy. But in general, most women choose free birth because they have no other option. That's it. That comes out. If they had the option to have a midwife support them in a home birth without over managing it and without putting all these requirements on it, and you must reach this time. And I've worked with midwives here who did work in Australia and did do home births in Australia, like under MGP situations, and said, it's so stupid because every 2 hours you'd have to ring the birth unit and be like, oh, this is what's happening. If that CNM at the birth unit said, nah, I don't like it, you need to come in, you had to come in. And I'm just like blown away by that, because I'm like, nobody's telling me when I'm going into the hospital. Like, no one's telling me this birth took too long. I recently recorded a story.
I can't remember which episode. It was only a couple of episodes ago, with a mum who was in it was her first baby, birthing at home in the publicly funded home birth system, and had a midwife. I mean, there's a couple of things that could have played into why this happened, but the midwife, it got to 9 hours, and like 9 hours of attendance meant that they had to basically be talking about transferring him, because that's what the midwives in this program were, that was their limit. And so the midwife ended up giving an episiotomy to the woman so that she could still birth at home because of the time constraint. And I was just like, what the heck? That was so silly. That's
so messed up.
So messed up. Yeah. And even, also a couple of stories ago, a mum that got told she could be in the publicly funded home birth program, and then they told her she couldn't, and then they told her she could, and then she had a positive GBS result, and then they risked her out again, and then they said then she went in and asked for an appointment with the obstetricians to argue her case, and then they were like, okay, and then I think it was literally like at 38 weeks, or maybe even later, like the midwives had dropped off the pool and the oxygen and everything. She got a call and said, the obstetrician has been looking at your notes again, and you're now no longer eligible. And she was only 38 weeks. So she ended up free birthing because what do you But that's what happens. And the fact that an obstetrician would make that
choice blows my mind, because that just I had this client who had gestational diabetes, but honestly, like, only just. She just tipped over, so she was going to be diet controlled anyway. Does my head in this stuff, but regardless, she did the test. This is what she got. Anyway, she went and saw an obstetrician, and she must have, I think she was about 36 weeks, went to the obstetrician and was like, she'd had perfect blood sugars the whole time, never needed any medication. For all intents and purposes, if you looked at her blood sugars that whole time, you would have thought she was a normal person without GDM anyway. Normally grown baby, all that. Says to the obstetrician, well, I'm planning to home birth. And he was just like, absolutely not. Absolutely not. You can't home birth. And she said, well, why can I not home birth? And he's like, because you have gestational diabetes. And she's like, but what is the risk of the gestational diabetes? And then he's like, the shoulder dystocia, the baby with bad blood sugars. And she's like, please tell me, if my blood sugars, though, have been normal this whole time, how have I now grown a baby that will have shoulder dystocia and have blood sugar issues after birth, when literally my sugars have been perfect this whole time? That doesn't happen. That's not how that works. And so when she came back to me and said that to me, I was like, why on earth would you ask an obstetrician for his opinion on you home birthing? He has no say in the matter. I said, don't even worry about it. He literally has no say. You're the only person that has a say. You could argue that I have a say, but I don't have a say, because at the end of the day, if someone said to me they're staying home to birth their baby, then okay, cool, we're staying home to birth the baby. So I was like, all you have to decide is if you want to home birth and if you feel comfortable home birthing. And she was like, well, I do. And I'm like, well, then cool, we'll have a baby at home. It was just so crazy. And, it's just, she birthed the baby, no shoulder dystocia. The baby's blood sugars were completely fine. She was even like, should I check the blood sugars? And I'm like, I mean, you can do what you want, but I wouldn't be recommending it. So it just blows your mind, that kind of stuff. It's just no common sense either. And I think that's what is hard. Everybody's looking, I feel like it's because everybody's viewing it with a viewpoint of liability and being sued. But the thing that cracks me up about our country is you can't sue no one can be sued in our country for that. We have ACC, which is like an accident compensation service, whatever you want to call it. And so like we as health professionals, you could technically be taken through like the Health and Disability Commission if something serious happened and someone complained about you, and they could strike you off, or they could make you do extra courses or have supervision. They can decide that, but no one, like none of us can be sued civilly. Obviously if you made a willful choice that knowingly caused the death of someone, then you could be done criminally for it. But you can't, my argument too is that they can't, if something bad happened though, they can't sue you. So I can't understand also why anyone would use that as I understand in countries where you can be sued for it, that it is a big hindrance for people to make certain choices, but you can't have that here. So again, I'm just like, I'm not sure. If you've got your ducks in the row and you've done solid documentation, or in certain cases, a woman's happy to sign something to say, hey, this is the conversations we've had, this was the information I was given, and this is the decision I made. Then I'm not quite sure why we're worried about what somebody else chooses to do with their body.
It's I wanted to say, like, I feel like there's so much that, I mean, there's a policy and there's something written about literally everything. And I think because, like, that must play a role, that because it's all written down somewhere, we have lost the ability to think outside the box, because that's what the health system, at least in a pathological, like, medical sense, that's what they want. They want everybody to follow the same thing, so that, that you have the same outcome. Like if you break a bone, you want it dealt with in like a standard way, I guess.
Well, for populations, they have to have that, right? To keep everybody in control and to manage how many hundreds of thousands of millions of people, they need to put strategies, policies, guidelines in place to give some people guidance. But it's not a rule book for the woman to follow.
Exactly. But I think, in like hospital systems, especially, like, you just like lose that ability to think outside the box and actually like zoom out and be like, oh, actually, no, that doesn't actually make sense.
For sure. Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, it's been fantastic to talk to you and learn about New Zealand's home birth situation. Obviously, yeah, there's such a difference between Australia and New Zealand, even though we're neighbours. It's just wild that, yeah, it's kind of like the country lottery or the postcode lottery. It just like really depends.
It does. Yeah.
But yeah, it's fantastic. I hope people have really enjoyed hearing about how, from my perspective, how well it can be set up. And maybe that, obviously there's issues everywhere, but I think, yeah, ultimately I hope it like gives people some hope that it could be different. There is a way, there is somebody doing it differently that does seem to be working, at least better than we have it here in Australia. Yeah, thank you so much.
For sure, no problem. Thanks for having me.